Today I'm talking about using two-part fillers to fill holes in wood and metals and plastics and just about any material you can imagine. Welcome back to the Gosforth Handyman Tips Library. A very big welcome back to you all, and of course a very happy new year as well. I hope you're having a fantastic 2018 so far. If you're back at work, my condolences. If you're not back at work yet, well, it's probably going to be Monday, I would imagine, so not long now, but enjoy what you've got left of this weekend. Today, I'm going to be talking a little bit about two-part fillers. Before I do, I just want to tell you a couple of little things that have been going on. Over the festive period, I have been refreshing the gosforthhandyman.com website, so I've been rebuilding that from scratch. It's going to be kind of a bit of a central hub for everything related to my YouTube channel, so you can get a bit of extra information on there and a whole load of other stuff. And also, finally, I'm on Patreon now as well, which I know a few of you had been asking about. So get yourself onto patreon.com/GosforthHandyman. I'm going to do a bit of a separate video about the whole Patreon thing quite shortly, but have a quick look round and you can see what sort of things are going on my Patreon. There's a link in the description somewhere down there and a card somewhere up there, so just click on one of them and it'll take you straight to it and you can buy us a pint if you feel like it. Oh, and before I forget as well, thank you so much for helping me hit the 5,000 subscriber mark, which I hit literally on New Year's Eve. And even more awesome than that, thanks to everyone out there for helping me get past 1 million views on YouTube. That is such a milestone for me, not something that I ever thought that I would get to on this channel. So I'm really looking forward to giving you a whole load more videos this year. So watch this space throughout 2018. I've got a whole load of interesting stuff to share with you. If you are a maker, no matter what your abilities are, whether you're just getting into making stuff or you're an established trade person, my aim on this channel is to give you something interesting to watch while you're having a bit of a break from making stuff. Whether you're making stuff out of wood or you're building entire houses, I just want to give you something a bit different to watch. That's kind of my aim. So today's tip is all about using two-part fillers. They sometimes get called epoxy fillers or epoxy resins or two-part polyester resins, and effectively it's kind of like a plastic. I'm sure a chemistry type person would be able to explain it in a bit more detail, but it sets through an exothermic catalytic reaction between a filler and a hardener. So basically this hardener sets off the catalytic reaction and turns it into a kind of solid lump of goob. And you'll actually feel it gets warm as the filler sets, and it's quite a good gauge of when the filler's about to go off completely. In the UK, the main brands are things like Ronseal two-part wood filler. These are good because they come in a whole load of different colours. That's a natural one, that's a dark one, I think you can get a light one and a mid one and whatnot. There's U-Pol Easy 1, there's Bonda Decor Fill, which is that stuff, and there's kind of a wood filler equivalent of the Bonda stuff as well. And I'm pretty sure Isopon P38 car body filler is exactly the same stuff. It certainly smells the same. You'll have to excuse me throat, I've got a bit of a cold at the minute and it's like, In America, I think the stuff we're talking about here gets called Bondo, but I know there's lots of different types of Bondo filler, so maybe someone can pop in the comments what the equivalent product is. I'm going to link to all of these in the description, and I'll pop a link to the American version in the description as well if someone tells us what it's called. I mainly use the Bonda stuff, but it's Bonda in the UK, not Bondo. I think it's made by a completely different company. So two-part fillers are great for a lot of reasons. In my opinion, they give the best finish of any type of filler. They stick to almost any substrate. They can be sanded and painted in under 20 minutes. They can be sanded to zero. In other words, you can sand it to a very, very, very thin layer so that you get a perfect blend into whatever you're trying to fill. They can be painted with almost any type of paint. They take stain very well, and they're very resistant to cracking as well because there is a very slight bit of flexibility to them. So I've generally found whenever I've used a two-part filler, I've never seen it crack. I'm not saying it's guaranteed not to crack, but as fillers go, I find the two parts seem to be one of the most crack-resistant fillers there is, other than maybe obviously corks and really, really flexible fillers like that. The disadvantages of the two-part filler is that it can set very, very quickly depending on the climate. Sometimes you've only got maybe 2 or 3 minutes of working time, especially if it's very hot weather. Also, you can't really smooth it out with your finger. So if you're wanting to smooth it into like the corner of a joint or something like you would with a cork, that doesn't work too well with the two-part fillers. And apart from anything else, it's a nightmare to get off your finger once you've done that. The Bonda filler is grey and can take a good few coats of paint to turn it white. There are white equivalents of the Ronseal filler, but even those are slightly off-white, so they're still going to take a couple of coats if you're putting them on like a white wall or white skirting boards and stuff like that. And the other thing about them is that they're quite expensive. The Bonda Decor Fill that I use is about 40 quid for a tub like this, but it does last, and I tend to only use it for smaller kind of filling repairs. And lastly, this is kind of a love it or hate it kind of thing, but it does have quite a strong smell. Personally, I think it smells awesome. I don't advise you sniff it straight out of the can, but the good thing is, as soon as the filler has set, the smell tends to go away. So as I say, I buy the Bonda Decor Fill stuff in big 7 kilo kind of tins, and they're about 40 quid for a tin, but as I say, it does last quite a while. And what I do with this, because it's not really practical taking the big tin round on jobs, so I decant that into just a jar, just a Doritos dip jar actually, which obviously other brands of dips are available. But I find this works pretty well. I can easily top it up. I have tried Nutella jars in the past and it's melted the lid on the plastic of the jar, so I would suspect that's something to do with the kind of styrene fumes that come off it or whatever. So I would suggest a jar that is like glass with a metal lid. Seems to work absolutely fine if you are going to decant it out. And these big tins come with, I think, about 5 tubes of the hardener. So that's the hardener that you use. I find that the 5 tubes is more than enough. I never run out of hardener. But it's always handy to have extra hardener kicking about just in case you do run short on a job or whatever. You need ideally 2 filler knives. I've got a 1.5 inch knife and a 3 inch knife. I'll explain why I use 2 of them in a minute. It helps if they're both clean and sharp. I clean and sharpen them just on my belt sander. You can also just use a piece of sandpaper if that's easier, but you want them to be nice and sharp. That helps to get a nice smooth finish on your filler. If you're wondering how sharp my knives are, this is how sharp my knives are. And finally, I just use offcuts of laminate to mix the filler on. Thank you, Richie. Your floor is still going strong. This just works great. It's got a nice kind of smooth finish. Again, when it's hardened, you can just use a bit of sandpaper to clean it. And then I've been using that bit for well over a year, and the laminate's never kind of worn off it. Quite heavy duty laminate that. Right, so I've got a bit of wood here that I've knocked some holes into that we're going to try and fill. So we've got kind of a deepish hole here, and we've got some kind of flat holes and things that I've done with a hammer over on that side. So to mix it, you want a ratio of approximately a golf ball to a pea. So it's not that critical. You don't have to have a golf ball size of filler, but that's kind of your ratio. So for that, you only need a tiny bit. That'll do. Tiny bit of the hardener, and that's enough to set off the catalytic reaction. Now when it comes to mixing it, what I like to do, it's very cold in my workshop at the minute, so it's a little bit stiffer than normal, but what I like to do is kind of do it in lines like that, and then go across like that, and that's it. Try not to spend any longer than about 20 seconds mixing it, because it really doesn't need to be that well mixed. Remember, this is a catalytic reaction that's happening. Let me just prove that to you. I've got a different filler knife here, and I'm just going to get another little blob of filler over here. Check that you can see that. I'm going to pop a little bit of the hardener on that. And watch how much I mix this, okay? Right, that'll do. We'll come back to that in a minute. I'm going to use this bit that I've used on the knife here to fill what's on this piece of wood. So as I say, you want to work really, really quickly. I'm going to squeeze this into all the holes on this piece of wood. I've probably got a little bit too much filler on my knife here, to be honest. But what you want to do when you're filling the holes, especially for kind of bigger holes, let me just get a little bit, this is why having two filler knives is handy. Start from the middle of the hole and drag out. So again, start from kind of the middle of the hole and drag out. I've ballsed that up, that'll do. Otherwise, what you can find is, if you just drag across like that, you'll end up with a low point on that side that hasn't got any filler in. You want to try and leave the filler slightly proud, and if you do it this way, it will leave the filler very, very slightly proud, ready to sand. Likewise, up here, we'll go to the middle and pull out. That'll do. Obviously, on wood, you would normally use a natural coloured filler, but I'm assuming here that we're going to be painting this or whatever. And what I should have said before as well, before you start doing any filling, I would generally suggest putting the lid on your filler and on the hardener as well. Also, never be tempted to go back into your filler pot with a knife that's got filler on it, because the hardener that's already on your filler knife will set off your entire jar of filler, and if you've just spent 40 quid on an entire pot of filler, you could accidentally cause a catalytic reaction in the whole tub and set the whole tub solid. So keep the hardener and anything that's got the hardener in it well away from your main jar of filler. So I can feel this is just starting to go off. It's not, you see how it's not sticking to my finger anymore? It's not quite there. It's very cold in my workshop. I'm going to pop the heater back on. You tend to find the colder it is, the longer it takes to set. The warmer it is, the quicker it sets. I think it says on the instructions for the Bonda that it takes 5 to 7 minutes at about 15 degrees before it goes hard. And at the minute, my workshop is, because it's Baltic outside, my workshop's only 10.5 degrees at the minute, so it is a bit cold in here for using filler, but it'll still work, it'll be fine. It'll just take a bit longer than normal to go off, but it will go off. Right, I'm going to switch the heater off so you can hear us a bit better. So as soon as it starts to gel, in other words, as soon as it starts to kind of go a little bit solid, we'll put this one to one side for the minute because that one's going to take a bit longer. But as soon as it starts to go kind of, you know, it's not rock solid, but it's starting to kind of gel up, get your tools cleaned. Now, we're still waiting on this to properly dry anyway, so you've got now better to do. So use one filler knife to clean off your other filler knife. But all we're going to do, you see that's kind of, it's not hard yet, but you can feel it's warm. That catalytic reaction is taking place at the minute. Once that starts to cool down, that's a good indicator of when it's going to be ready for sanding. But at the minute, all we're going to do is just get the tools clean, and we're going to do that while it's kind of in this slightly gel state. I've managed to get filler everywhere. Obviously, mind your fingers on your razor sharp filling knives at this point. It's handy to have a bit of blue roll to hand as well for just getting things clean. Try not to get your fingers in it. It is clarky stuff to clean up. So this has had probably just over 5 minutes so far, and we've just gone past the kind of gel stage of the drying or the setting process. It's not quite ready to sand yet. Let's see what this one's like. That's a lot softer, but this, it's only, you saw how much mixing that got. That'll take a little bit longer to go off. We'll just keep that to one side. So my main tip when you're actually doing the filling, obviously whatever you're filling, make sure it's nice and dry and free from dust so that the filler actually sticks to it. But generally this is the stickiest stuff known to mankind. It sticks to most things without any problem whatsoever. And as I say, when you're mixing it, don't mix it any longer for kind of 20 or 30 seconds. You've got such a short working time with it, 5 minutes tops, that you don't want it hardening before you've actually managed to fill all of your holes. And remember as well, for any kind of deeper holes, you can always do 2 applications. So once your first coat has dried, you can always go back over it and put some more filler into it. So you'll feel it go warm as the reaction takes place. Once it's cooled down, you'll feel it'll be completely solid, and that's pretty much it ready to sand. You can tell if you can dig your fingernail into it, then give it a little bit longer to go off. But as long as you can't dig your fingernail into it, that's ready for sanding, and it should be absolutely fine. Normally I would use like a random orbit sander for sanding something like this to get a nice finish on it. I'm just going to show you with a scrap of 60 grit here, just to show you how easy this sands. Obviously I would suggest you wear a dust mask of some description while you're using it. And what I would suggest, if you've got any slight indentations or anything, you can always go over with another layer of filler, but this is pretty much absolutely smooth. My general rule of thumb is, if you can feel a dent, you'll see a dent. If you can't feel it, you probably won't see it. And on this, I can't feel these dents at all. It's absolutely perfectly smooth. Once this has a coat of undercoat on, and then it's painted over the top with your top coats of paint, you will never know that that's been filled. Another thing that you can do as well, if you've got very, very tiny kind of holes or gaps or anything like that in your filler, you can just use a tiny bit of cork to fill those in before you do the painting. But it depends how big the gaps are, obviously, because cork can take a while to dry. Sand it, prime it, paint it, done. Oh, and I forgot to mention, the stuff that's on our filler knife here is now absolutely solid. I'm going to have to kind of chip that off my knife. It did take a lot longer for it to set because obviously it hasn't been mixed properly and it's really cold in here. But my main point is, you don't need to overdo the mixing. You want it to be well mixed, but try not to spend too long because you will just eat up all of your working time with a filler. The more you use it, the more you get used to it. So play with it. You know, you can't go wrong. Just make a few random holes in bits of wood and just try it out. That's what I would suggest. And you can even use it to fill quite big holes in plasterboard. Check this out. So by doing a slight chamfer on the edge of the plasterboard, it's just giving something for the filler to stick to. What I would normally do here, obviously if this is in a wall, you could screw a piece of wood behind it or whatever you wanted to support your middle bit of plasterboard. What I would do now is just leave that for a bit to go off, and then you can apply another layer over the top, give it a sand, and you will never see that hole, I guarantee it. So there you go. I hope you found that useful. There are many situations where two-part filler isn't the best route to go down, and I'm going to talk about some of the other fillers I use on future videos, so don't forget to hit subscribe. Don't forget to pop over to my Patreon and buy us a pint if you've liked these videos. There will be some exclusive content coming up on Patreon over the next year, including things like how I price up jobs, video commentaries on some of the builds that I've done. So if you are just getting into joinery and you're wanting a few tips of how to price things up. You might find that sort of information useful. That'll be on my Patreon only feed though, so you will need to support the channel on Patreon to get access to that. Any questions at all, pop them in the comments and I'll do my best to help you out on there. Also, you can use the comment thing on Patreon as well, and I will probably be using the Patreon comments a little bit more than the YouTube comments because the YouTube comment management system is rubbish. By the way, if you do post comments on a video on YouTube and you find I've ignored you, it's not because I'm ignoring you, it's because your comment probably hasn't appeared in the comment management system. That happens quite regularly for some weird reason, and it's not until I actually drill down into the videos that I see the comments, but that's kind of becoming impractical now that I'm getting close to the 100 video mark. So I really need to use the comment management system within YouTube itself, and unfortunately, as I say, it's not great at the minute. Hopefully they will sort that out at some point. But anyway, for now, thank you once again from the bottom of my heart for watching. Have a fantastic 2018 and I shall see you next time. Bye!